In the study of modern belief systems, scholars have long noted that religion rarely announces itself. It does not arrive with doctrine and declaration. It arrives with a push notification, with a habit, with the slow, barely perceptible migration of daily life into something that begins to resemble devotion, and eventually becomes indistinguishable from it. By 2034, historians would later identify what sociologists at the Australian National University termed the professional turn, a decade-long transformation in which the rituals of career advancement ceased to be a means to an end, and became, for many millions of people, the end itself. The means also was LinkedIn. It was LinkedIn all the way down. This is the story of how networking became a virtue, optimization became a theology, and a platform originally designed to share resumes quietly became the most influential spiritual institution of the early 21st century. Nobody planned it. Almost everyone participated. Several people were grateful. The conditions were, in retrospect, ideal. The automation wave of the late 2020s had rendered large categories of employment structurally precarious. Not merely threatened, precarious. Workers who had trained for careers found those careers abbreviated. Entire professional cohorts were compressed into a labor market that rewarded visibility over competence, adaptability over expertise, and a 6-line headline over a 30-year career. In this climate, the cultivation of one's professional identity ceased to be a supplementary activity. It became, for a generation of workers, the primary one. LinkedIn, already the dominant professional networking platform with over 1 billion registered users by 2026, became the principal site of this anxiety and its principal consolation. Researchers at the University of Melbourne published a landmark 2029 study, The Virtue of Visibility, which documented that 71% of surveyed workers between the ages of 22 and 45 reported feeling a moral obligation. The word they used was obligation, to maintain an active professional presence online. Not for career advancement alone, for something closer to self-respect. The remaining 29%, the study noted, had simply not yet updated their profiles. Pause. The language had already begun to shift. People no longer simply worked. They built. They did not take jobs, they pursued missions. They were not employed, they were on a journey. Nobody was ever fired. They graduated. They were alumni of a company that no longer required their particular brand of excellence. And the audience for that journey, one's connections, followers, endorsers, had taken on a significance that the platform's original architects had not anticipated and by 2030 could no longer
Look inside
contain.
yourself. The future is not given. It is built by those brave enough to reach for it. Now go and build it.
Had found its secular equivalent. The morning engagement ritual was perhaps the most widespread. Documented across dozens of workplace ethnographies, it typically involved waking before 6, reviewing one's overnight notification metrics, composing a reflective professional post, usually framed as a personal lesson learned from an experience that had, in many cases, not occurred, and posting before the morning commute. The practice was rarely described as compulsory. It was, participants explained, simply what you did. Not doing it was also an option, in the same way that not breathing was an option. Weekly connection reviews, quarterly profile audits, the careful curation of one's endorsement portfolio.
Absolutely, great
Children
quarter.
were not exempt from the cultural logic. By 2031, several private schools in Sydney and Melbourne had introduced what were then called Future Leaders programs, curricula in which students as young as 11 were taught to articulate their personal brand, develop a professional mission statement, and rehearse the elevator pitch. The pitch, refined and delivered at biannual family events, took on the character of a recital. Parents sat in rows, grandparents recorded on phones, children stood at small lecterns and explained in 2 minutes or fewer who they were and what value they intended to bring to the world. One 11-year-old in Torak described herself as a future-focused impact architect with a bias toward action. She received a standing ovation. She was in year 6. The ceremony was, by any observable measure, a rite of passage. Networking pilgrimages, weekend conferences, and industry retreats, increasingly attended not for professional development but for communal affirmation, grew in both frequency and fervor. The annual Connect Summit in Brisbane, which had attracted approximately 2,000 attendees in 2025, drew 67,000 in 2033. Participants described the experience in terms that previous generations had reserved for music festivals or, further back, religious gatherings. Transformative, they said, like coming home. Several attendees wept openly during a keynote about quarterly OKRs. Business cards, long declared obsolete, underwent a remarkable cultural revival, not as functional tools but as artifacts. Families preserved the cards of successful relatives in albums. The practice of inheriting a parent's card, framed and displayed in a home office, became sufficiently widespread by 2032 to warrant coverage in the Australian Financial Review. A secondary market emerged. A mint-condition 2019 McKinsey Associate card sold at auction in 2033 for $11,000. Every belief system generates its clergy. In the emergent professional faith, this function was served by a loosely affiliated class of cultural figures: executive coaches, productivity influencers, LinkedIn thought leaders, and most prominently, the recruiters. The recruiter had always occupied an unusual position: intermediary, gatekeeper, oracle. But as the professional turn deepened, their cultural authority expanded well beyond their formal role. A positive connection request from a senior recruiter could, in some professional communities, elevate a person's perceived social standing in ways that bore little relation to any actual job opportunity. It was, for the recipient, a benediction. Several people changed their profile photos immediately afterwards, as though they had been made new. Thought leaders, a phrase that had once carried a note of mild irony, were by 2032 accorded a respect that the term had never previously warranted. The most followed, those with connection counts in the millions, delivered what could only be described as homilies: short, emotionally resonant posts about failure, resilience, gratitude, and growth, accompanied by photographs of themselves looking thoughtfully into the middle distance, or standing with their arms folded in front of a wall that was, for reasons never explained, always exposed brick. The 7 Pillars of Professional Abundance, a framework devised by a Sydney-based executive coach named Damien Forel in 2030, became the period's most shared piece of long-form content. It had been read, by verifiable estimates, 340 million times. Forel himself went on to found the Center for Intentional Leadership, an institution which, by the time of this documentary's production, employs more staff than the University of Tasmania and offers a graduate diploma in intentional disruption. The sermons, as they came informally to be known, were not satirized, they were attended. Historians use the term compassion fatigue to describe the exhaustion that follows sustained periods of emotional labor. The professional turn produced an analogous phenomenon. Sociologists call it performance collapse. By 2034, a significant and measurable segment of the workforce had begun to disengage, not from work itself, but from the infinite obligation of being seen to work meaningfully. Burnout rates among the 25-40 demographic reached 58%, according to data collected by the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare. The most common presenting complaint was not overwork in the conventional sense, but something clinicians struggled to categorize: a profound exhaustion at the requirement to continuously narrate one's professional self. The quiet profiles movement, users who simply stopped posting, without announcement or explanation, grew in 2033 from a marginal phenomenon to a documented social trend. LinkedIn's internal engagement team, alarmed, released platform updates designed to incentivize renewed participation. These included a feature called Soul Refresh TM, which sent users a daily affirmation based on their job title. These were largely unsuccessful. In Brisbane, a 34-year-old project manager named Claudia Hernus wrote a post that read, in its entirety, "I don't know what I'm passionate about. I've been telling people I'm passionate about things for 11 years, and I genuinely cannot remember why." The post received 4.2 million engagements. It was, many later observed, the most human thing the platform had seen in years. LinkedIn's algorithm flagged it as low-quality content and suppressed its reach. It went viral anyway. What the professional turn ultimately reveals is not a failure of ambition, but a failure of proportion. The instinct to connect, to be recognized, to demonstrate one's worth, these are not pathological impulses. They are among the most durable features of human social life. What the early 21st century did, perhaps uniquely, was sever these impulses from the relationships that had historically contained them. Family, community, place, friendship unmeasured by mutual professional utility. In the absence of those containers, the work of self-definition migrated to the only institution that remained reliably present, reliably attentive, and reliably willing to tell you, through the unambiguous grammar of engagement metrics, that you had been seen. It told you what you were worth. And for a time, A very significant number of people believed it. Some of them are still posting,